How you doing, guys? Eric from RuleTheWasteland.com. This video is the long-awaited, anticipated review of Leave the World Behind, the latest disaster SHTF preparedness type movie that we can hopefully look at and maybe take some real-world preparedness lessons from. As I say in all these movies, or in all these reviews of movies, I know they're just movies, but you can still get to thinking about what you could or would or should do in a situation if something similar were to happen in real life, which movies always have unrealistic elements, but they also usually have some kernel of, reality to them, or at least some scenario that we can say, you know what would I do? And some seemingly outlandish scenarios are sometimes required to really get you thinking outside the box, even if they're as displayed, not likely to happen in real life. This movie's gotten a lot of press because, there's always a certain corner of the internet will think that there's like predictive programming, or that because the Obamas were involved, that this is somehow meaningful in some way. I don't usually prescribe to any of that. I think it's just as likely that because the world is so crazy, people are more likely to be thinking about and making movies about this sort of thing. But there have been SHTF movies, as long as there have been movies, pretty much, even as far back as, which one is the one, A Panic in Year Zero and stuff like that, all the way up till now. There's never really been a huge drought of SHTF movies, so I don't view it as being particularly meaningful, especially considering how, I don't want to say mainstream, but how much more widely talked about things like prepping and disasters are because of the way the world is today. And I can see why people have such thoughts about it, because it's very obvious from the first frame of this movie. Some of my critique is going to be about the movie in general, because it's kind of weird just from a movie making perspective. It's obvious that this guy, I think he's had like one other thing that was successful, which was Mr. Robot, the director was, and I had never watched that, so he got some level of clout or fame or notoriety or whatever just from that, and this may be an example of him just getting to do what he wants and weirding out, because it seems to me like there's like 4 or 5 different directors that he wants to emulate, and he fancies himself as this mega artist, so everything's done very curated, and he wants people to be able to look back at these Easter eggs like, oh, the number on the clock, and this, like, of course he did that on purpose, but I don't think it's to signal anything in particular. I mean, you can tell by the way the shots are set up in this movie, which is one of my biggest critiques with the movie as a movie, is that everything is just super extra. I have no idea what this movie cost to make. They have some randomly big stars in it, like Julia Roberts for no reason. So, but even aside from paying the actors, I wouldn't be surprised if this movie cost way, way more than it should have / could have, just because of the super extra cinematography and things like that were involved. Everything was set, like the first shot of the movie reminds me of like a Wes Anderson movie, very centered, strange colored, like blue room, that sort of thing. And then at the end of the scene, where you first introduce this atrocious character that's played by Julia Roberts, then it kind of like stops and zooms in on her face while she delivers this line like it's some grindhouse Quentin Tarantino movie. And the whole movie's like that, with these weird, doesn't know what it wants as far as vibe, as a movie. And so everything is extra, lots of shots. The director loves these shots of the person staring past the camera. Everyone's like looking, and like you don't know what they're looking at, they're just looking. I mean, sometimes you see what they're looking at eventually, but just this shot of people looking past the camera, they're talking out a window. Very strange, highly curated, to where it just, you can tell it feels unnatural. And I think these are the vibes that people are getting as to why they think this movie is, maybe potentially more than it seems. But just because this guy has all these very specific choices, he wants to simultaneously be Wes Anderson, Quentin Tarantino, Jordan Peele, Steven Spielberg, whatever else you can find in there. And every shot is on like a track. I don't even know what they call those. It's not the dollies like the carts, but everything is like a tracked shot or a drone shot for absolutely no reason. You'll have weird special effects where the camera will like drop through a floor to show what's happening in the next room for no reason. Doesn't add anything to the movie. It's kind of a weird vibe. And the music, oh my God, the music is so incredibly overbearing that it's like a joke. It's like a satire. It's like you have a cat walking on the keyboard or the piano or whatever, like dun 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 dun. It's like a kindergarten's Phantom of the Opera recitation or something. Just incredibly overbearing music. Even from the first moment it drops into the credits with this goofy kind of incongruent rap song after this bizarre opening scene. So enough about the movie, but I can see why people get weird feelings from this. It's obvious that this weirdo set up every shot completely curated way. Nothing seems completely natural for that reason. And it doesn't really work with the movie because you need it to seem like it would make more sense if he descended into the kind of strangeness, but it's just a strange movie overall. But that doesn't mean there's not still some prepping and survival lessons we can learn from this. It's probably going to be a long video, and my battery is fucking dying. But we'll get into the movie at least as the story elements. Alright, so I feel like Canadian Prepper over here are always running out of battery. Somebody needs to get that man an extension cord. Nate, brother, his batteries are like 30 bucks. Anyways, love his stuff. I don't care if you don't need to hear about it. But it does seem like he's been running out of battery a lot. Maybe that's just his cue to sign off. But anyways, so, you know, the general story of this movie is that they are a New York family, this flustered housewife who is, for no reason, played by Julia Roberts, who is, I don't know if she's miscast. The character is absolutely atrocious, and like the husband's like a kind of just beta pushover, which I mean, that's probably not unrealistic, but it's just makes for an annoying characters. They have a couple kids. She decides that she wants to go to vacation, like very impromptu, so they get this Airbnb outside of the city, you know, very nice, but a lot more, not even rural, but just bigger properties, more separation. It's not that like very urban New York City type scenario. The first kind of prepping related or disaster related thing that happens is they're at the beach, and a like giant either oil tank or a shipping container, I don't remember, like runs aground. I mean like runs aground. And still horribly overbearing music. It still sounds like a bunch of ferrets on the keyboard. And those things have got to have like empty even, like a 50-foot draft or something, maybe even more than that. And I won't be surprised if it's upwards of 100 feet when they're full. And it comes up like on the beach, and I mean like on the beach, which would never happen. Most of these beaches and areas where people are actually, you know, swimming and stuff, the shelf goes out pretty far, miles in some cases, but, you know, it's, in any case, it's, you know, it's 6, 10, 20, it's a while before it gets to be more than 40 or 50 feet deep usually, so that thing would just kind of stop out there, be very non-dramatic compared to what's happening in the movie, and, it just would never get right up on shore, so that's done for, you know, cinematic effect. And there's not too many lessons to be learned from this other than to have some situational awareness and notice if something is bearing down on you. You know, not necessarily always having headphones on and whatnot in public, but, you know, other than that, they have no real reason to suspect that this is anything other than a, you know, freak error of some kind, freak accident, mistake, whatever. But as they get a little bit further in the movie, they start discovering that multiple forms of communication or power are having issues. That should be a massive red flag, and you should never just be like, huh, my phone's not working, huh, TV's not working, huh, radio's kind of off. Like, your proper spidey sense should be tingling big time if there is multiple types of infrastructural elements of modern life that are not working simultaneously, especially ones that seem like they're not connected. Now, as we've talked about before, we know that a lot of this stuff is actually very connected. Even things like satellite phones require some extent of connection with, you know, ground relays or servers or things like that. But, you know, it's at least a sign that this is either major incident or not localized, which is, you know, major also in and of itself. So multiple points of failure infrastructurally should be a huge red flag. You should be like DEFCON 3 pretty much right away. And the basic, you know, premise of the movie is that the owner of this Airbnb who lives in New York City comes back as they kind of realize what's happening, and they come back to the Airbnb instead of going into the city where they were watching a, you know, an opera or orchestra or something like that. But this is another point where the movie does things, it makes it really strange interaction to try and make you like worried, not know what's going to happen, but it's very unrealistic. Like if you were really coming back to your house, you wouldn't be doing things in such like a sus way that could be misinterpreted by the people living there. You'd be like, hey, you know what? Big power outage in the city, or you wouldn't even have to explain to them. You just say, hey, I'm sorry, this is emergency. I'm coming back to my house. You're welcome to stay if you want. Of course, you'll get a full refund, but we need to stay here just because of, you know, life circumstances. Of course, you'll get a full refund, and you don't have to leave, but we're coming in. Instead of this weird, like, kind of taking a long time to introduce himself. They purposefully make it seem real, like, creepy, just for the sake of the viewer and the vibe, without thinking that this is a completely unrealistic scenario, or at least unrealistic way of acting. You know, of course, at this point, they know more about how phones and internet and, you know, some kind of blackout in New York City is going on, and the, you know, Julia Roberts' character still just decides to be a giant Karen about it instead of trying to figure out what's going on and thinking if they should do anything. And the phones being out, obviously, in these modern movies is always a big deal, whether that's this one or Survival Family, the Japanese one, or, you know, any of the modern SHTF movies, first thing phone goes out, and that's realistic. So you have to have backups, paper maps. Having alternate means of communications is tough because, like I said, it's all interconnected, and there's just really not that feasible of cheap and portable alternate communications. Satellite phones are great if you can afford it, and they will work in a vast majority of disaster scenarios, just not the most extreme ones. You know, and, you know, different types of radios, short range, that can work if you have, you know, walkie-talkies, but just always having something with you that you can communicate other than, you know, two ways, kind of unrealistic a lot of times, unfortunately. You know, they rely on repeaters and big base stations a lot of times. Even this equipment requires licensing. So I think at least the minimum you can do is a passive information gathering, you know, one of these weather radios, or even those cheap, you know, disaster radios with the flashlight and the charger and the hand, like, those have their place, you know, in a situation like this. Eventually, after more just hemming and hawing and not sure exactly what's going on and several, you know, strange weirdness, Ethan Hawke, the dad character, decides he's going to go into town, which probably not the best idea. It might be necessary to try to gather information or supplies. They didn't no mention of really exactly what he's going to be doing, just trying to figure out what's going on. But doing so alone is always a bad idea. You should always go at least in terms of pairs or more, and separating in a situation where you don't have communications is a terrible idea. But at the very least, you should have set up exactly what the plan is, exactly when you're expected to be back, you know, just like the final rally point briefing, what to do if you don't get back, how you will communicate, what to do if you can't, what to do if I never come back, you know, like, should you come looking for him, should you stay, you know, because that's how things go massively wrong. And he doesn't, especially in an area where you don't know, you know, you're renting this place, or you're going to get lost, you don't have your GPS, they probably don't have a map. So at the very least, what you could do is write down while you're leaving, took a left here, took a right on the cardinal directions. You can use the odometer to get distances, went 4 miles, turned west onto this road, and that'll at least give you a way to get back. And they do mention satellite phones. I think the guy has one, or he's talking about someone he goes to a neighbor's house to find a satellite phone. And like I said, those have limitations. Definitely a big advantage in a lot of scenarios, but in a major widespread one, especially one that's corrupted the internet in various forms or connectivity, I would not be surprised to see satellite phones not really functioning as well as they're supposed to. Or at the very least, like I said, who you're calling. You have to have numbers. If they're on a satellite, or if they're on a cell phone, or even a regular landline, you might just be a one-way call anyway. So if you have 2 people with satellite phones, it's much more likely to work, but I would not count on them working in a absolutely major disaster scenario like a huge EMP or something like that. And I know JJ had a good video on this a while back. And another example of the movie making a scenario where they purposely make it creepy by making it slightly unrealistic. He encounters this, like, Hispanic woman in the middle of a field who's, like, yelling in Spanish, and, you know, it's difficult to communicate with someone who doesn't speak the same language as you, but you can usually get some sort of rudimentary idea of whether they want you to go with them, whether they want to ride, whether they need something. And they just, to make it more, like, creepy and confusing, they just have the woman that's, like, babbling at him nonstop straight for, like, a minute or two without doing anything to actually try and get across any idea to someone who you know isn't speaking the same language as you, which is, you know, might happen if someone's panicked, but neither person in this does anything to really try and figure out, work around the language barrier. Now, the one thing you can use, and I really like these, link will be in the description if I can find them, is back for, you know, in Iraq and stuff, and I think they have a civilian version too, they made these cards. It folds out like a map, so it's not really a card, it's like a big sheet, but all over the various pictures and diagrams of different things that you can use to literally voicelessly communicate. So whether this person is deaf or just doesn't speak the language, you can point, and there's, you know, ways to discuss transactions, discuss what you need or what you want, where you're going, directions, descriptions, all the animals, you know, familiar relations. There's all these different pictures that you can, like, point to you know, different types of locations and tools, and it's really cool. And they're very lightweight, so it's something that I would definitely recommend putting in a car kit or bug out bag or any major disaster plan, having one or two of these around. And again, they still have all these shots of people, just like fixed shot of them staring past the camera while they talk about something. Very weird and doesn't really contribute much, and it's just distracting. So it's over an hour into the movie where the first person suggests actually doing any kind of preparedness stuff, just kind of offhand. Like, they realize they should be doing something, and they're like, oh, what should we do? I think they mentioned, like, gathering food or putting water in the bathtub and a few other, you know, what I would consider minor things that they should have done from the moment they realized multiple forms of communications and stuff were being weird. But they don't actually do any of it. They're all decent suggestions. They all would be better than just sitting around not doing anything, which is what they continue to do, so... And then eventually they get panicked enough where they decide to leave, whereas at this point, I believe through either a brief cell phone message that they got through or a TV alert system or both, that it's been basically confirmed that there was a major terror attack. They don't know the extent of it, but they basically know there's been a major terror attack, at least somewhat locally, and they decide to leave to try to go back into the city, which is the absolute dumbest idea of all time. The only good thing about it is that they are... well, staying together and obviously taking some kind of action, but you can't do anything stupid. And you have to expect that a major downtown metropolitan area, like the major metropolitan area in the country, would be a war zone compared to just your Airbnb in some hoity-toity, you know, upper middle class or upper class area. And with much more resources there probably available, you know, with a lot fewer people, which is a huge advantage in a situation like this. Of course, it shows one of the daughter characters just walking around in like what's basically like a club dress when they should be at like DEFCON 2, maybe even DEFCON 1 in terms of preparation, alert mindset, and you should be wearing clothes that are going to be more protective, more resilient, and will serve you better in vast majority of situations. So she should be dressed like she's going to go on a hike probably, or camping, and should be doing everything she can to collect resources, and they just have them lounging around in basically like a club dress. So the characters are obviously stupid. I don't know if that's 100% unrealistic, but it is stupid. So as they're driving away, they quickly realize that the roads are blocked, and mercifully for them, it's because of a bunch of unmanned vehicles. The Teslas are all like hacked and crashing like they're told to crash. But that, first of all, that should give you a massive, you know, realization of how serious this is. If it's that level, it's obviously a state actor level attack of some kind that is like hijacking self-driving cars. But so, and it's not just a huge accidents with injured and crazed people. You know, it's empty cars, but they don't pull off the side of the road when they stop, and they almost get hit by one of these cars. It's just set to kind of drive until it smashes into something. And you know, if you're in a situation, like I said, you should be DEFCON 2, which means that if you have to stop, you should be doing some kind of security, at least keep your head on a swivel to figure out what's going on. Hopefully you obviously should be armed, but of course, none of these people are. When the owner of the Airbnb first shows up and they don't know what's going on and they hear these noises, the guy's like, she tells him, like, well, get a bat. And he's like, why would I have a bat? It's like, well, you should always have some sort of self-defense item, specifically if you are going somewhere outside of your normal plug-in location, house, homestead, whatever. And traveling can always make that difficult, but they're driving here, so any options, and as far as I know, they're staying in the same state or right next door, so they should be aware of the laws. You should always have something, whether that's obviously a gun if you can swing it, even knives, some kind of baton or jambok or pepper spray or taser, and there's so many options. You should always have something and not be relegated to just barehanded. But if you do, you should have your kung fu skills ready to give people a 3-piece in the soda too. You know, you've got to be ready to do every level, but preparedness is key obviously for that. Now, if you have a very capable, you know, off-road capable vehicle, leaving your area might be more of an option than if you just have a regular family sedan of some kind, but that's going to apply more to rural, spread out areas. Anywhere on the East Coast, like even if your vehicle is capable of driving on shoulders and gravel and stuff, a lot of the highways and roads are just not made that that's even possible. They'll have concrete dividers. There'll be so many other people there that other people have tried and failed, and derelict cars. You know, out here, or if you're in Wyoming, Montana, Nebraska, or something where it's just the highway goes long stretches of just undeveloped land. Even if it's rough, undeveloped land, if you have a, you know, serious off-road rig, you could drive around maybe knock down a fence or something and drive around various types of obstructions a lot more easily. But if you're in a dense urban area, that's not going to be an option nearly as often. So you should be even more of a hesitation to hit the road when you don't know what's going on. And after realizing the extent now to what's going on, they really should just marvel that they still have power and do everything they can to prepare and gather as much resources as possible while that's still the case. And they even have the character mention something about like realizing that they're in a war zone, but they still at that point aren't really doing anything about it. They're just like, which again, that might be realistic, but it's not what you should do. You should always be ready to act, whether that's doing the right thing, which is the best case, doing the wrong thing, which is second best case. Doing nothing is always the worst case. Now, I will say about this point, I think a few minutes later, they finally started at least filling up a bathtub, which is what they'd mentioned before, and was bare minimum type preparation with the extent to which they know things are going wrong. They should have done it a long time ago, and they should be doing more now. Because the power does finally go out. They do seem to have some candles, but candles are actually a very poor lighting option for disaster scenarios, and you should try to have as many other options as possible, specifically LED lights of some kind that are rechargeable in basically any way, solar, hand crank, whatever. They use so little power, and they're so far superior. Candles don't give off a lot of light. There's a fire hazard. You have to use your resources to light them, and especially the kind that you would have just in a normal house. Decorative ones won't last very long. The Yankee candle types that are in jars won't give you very much light because they're, shrouded. They have labels. They're just not meant for that. They're just meant for scent. So candles are a poor way to utilize light, but they are better than nothing. So there's been this weird noise that happened throughout the movie, like a big, huge, tremendous, like, that, turns out that, or it's explained kind of as possibly being some sort of energy weapon or something, and it causes this, like, radiation-like effect for the sun, where his, like, teeth starts falling out, vomiting blood and stuff like that. He's the only one who seems to be initially affected by it, at least in terms of what we see in the movie. And they do realize that they have some cash. They realize the usefulness of cash compared to other forms of money, which is true. In the beginning stages, this has already gotten serious enough that anyone who's accepted what's going on is going to be unlikely to take cash. But the neighbor knows of a neighbor who's like a prepper, who's meant as Kevin Bacon, but he's this prepper. And so they go over to him, and the owner of the Airbnb has had a gun that he actually had. We figured out pretty early in the movie when they're trying to make it creepy. They showed that he had a gun in this locked cabinet, which is a terrible idea, first of all, to leave one of your guns in a house that you're renting out. It is good that he has the gun on hand, of course, but given, what's going on. But stupid to leave a gun in a house that you're renting out to people. But they go over to this prepper's house to try to get medicine of some nondescript kind because they don't even know what is wrong with the kid. So what medicine are you going to get? Whether you don't know if it's radiation, some kind of crazy bioweapon, a virus, or some nerve gas. Like the treatments would be completely different. Most of them wouldn't work or do anything if it wasn't the right diagnosis. But whatever. They go over there, and they obviously are trying to paint this prepper character as being kind of crazy, even though he's right about almost everything. Seems to be the only one who knows what's going on. And they have him be like kind of bizarrely nonchalant. And which, I'm not... Preppers would, probably not be panicking as badly as most people, but they would be realizing the extent of this, and they would not just be having casual conversations, with neighbors who are pulling guns on them and whatnot. And he eventually takes the cash from Medicine 2 after a brief standoff, which I don't think, he would realize the uselessness of cash and what's coming, especially since he seems to know the extent of it. But another thing is, during this discussion of them trying to get the resources, which you will probably, in a situation like that, you might have people coming up to you, people that you care about, and trying to get resources that they know you have. And you're going to have to make a decision about what, like, if you don't need it at that very moment, it might be very tough to not give it to them. But then if you give away something like antibiotics, and then you don't have any when you do need it, that's a major problem. But one thing you should never do is two things. First of all, don't jump in between two people who are pointing guns at each other. That's stupid. Try to work your way around beside it to at least, give them more to think about, and maybe de-escalate from there. But there's always a situation that arises in movies where someone's pointing a gun at someone, and then the other person whips out a gun, and they're just like, whoa, and then they're both pointing guns at each other. Which, at that point, if someone is pointing a gun at you, or starting to point a gun at you, and you don't fire instantly to take out the threat, you might as well put your gun down and try to de-escalate. Because when you're just like, it's like a weird games theory situation where if you're just already both pointing at each other, only one person just has to do that, and then the other person is dead. So whoever decides to do it first wins. So unless you're going to be the one to do it right away, you might as well try to de-escalate. If for whatever reason you decide you don't want to shoot or can't shoot, then do something to de-escalate. You might as well put your gun down and hope they do too, because if they're pointing a gun at you and you're not going to, all they have to do is move their finger. So pointing your gun up or down isn't going to do much to prevent that if you're not going to shoot first anyway. So don't get in that situation. It's a stupid movie situation. If someone points a gun at you, you should probably have to shoot them. That's and you're going to be legally, in most cases, justified doing that, certainly morally. But I'm not a lawyer, so don't take legal advice from me. Do your own research. And just to show you how stupid the characters are, like the younger daughter, the daughter of Julia Roberts, like hears her mom calling and still just kind of like wanders off. You're in a situation that you know is basically apocalyptic, without exaggeration. You know crazy things are happening, and you hear your family member yelling, you don't know why, and you just kind of like ignore them and wander off. And so annoying. Hopefully unrealistic. I think most people would be at least scared enough they'd want to stick to the one thing that they know is the people that they're with and they care about, and not want to wander off into unknown scenarios. And they miraculously discover a neighbor's, like rich neighbor's house, who they are either dead or gone or whatever, and have a like unlocked, spectacularly like high-tech and complete survival bunker. So that's like the happy ending, I guess, is they get in this amazing bunker. But the girl, instead of like going out and telling her family, finds like the DVDs of Friends and starts watching that because she didn't get to finish on her car ride. She's been trying to watch the finale of Friends the whole time. So overall, a stupid movie. A few survival lessons we can learn from it, but pretty basic stuff if you ask me, because not a whole lot happens to show you the extent of the disaster, and the effects don't trickle down to them almost at all. You know, the only major effect that they have to deal with is the power eventually runs out, the roads are blocked, and the kid starts having to fly, you know, where his teeth get loose and fall out and whatnot. But, you know, they really don't have to deal with any long-term effects of what certainly would be happening in a scenario like that, and what will happen after the end of the movie, but while they're safe in this magical bunker that they got so lucky to find. So if only we can all be so lucky when the disaster strikes, but don't count on it, so be ready. And there's not much else I can say about this movie. Overall, it wasn't very good. Very, very, very overwrought and extra, to use the parlance of our times. And I think it was more about this director thinking he's some artist than it is about like hidden messages and whatnot. That's what it felt like. But it's on Netflix if you guys want to watch it, so it is free if you already have a Netflix subscription. If not, please don't get Netflix just for this movie. It's not worth it. But if you have seen it or you watched it after this, jump down in the comments, let me know what you think. But overall, lame characters, developed plot, didn't do a host of issues from a movie making perspective. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys later.